Power has a scent. It's the smell of old leather, expensive cologne, and the metallic tang of fear in lesser men. For 3 decades, Adam Schiff had bathed in it. He moved through the world wrapped in an invisible armor of influence, a man for whom rules were merely suggestions and consequences were for other people. On this day, under the sterile glare of the House Judiciary Committee's lights, he was the high priest of his own religion, and the hearing room was his cathedral. The air, thick with the murmur of journalists and the silent hum of broadcast cameras, vibrated with a familiar energy of an execution. But Schiff, in his tailored suit and with a smile that never quite reached his eyes, failed to understand he was not the executioner. He was the condemned. His target sat across from him, a picture of unassuming stillness, Ben Shapiro. To Schiff, Shapiro was a gnat, an annoyance to be swatted away for the amusement of the Washington elite. A podcaster, a digital carnival barker. In Schiff's grand opera of power, this man was not even a footnote. He had orchestrated this entire spectacle as a masterclass in public humiliation, a demonstration of how the powerful deal with the inconvenient. He had prepared his lines, arranged his props, and set his stage. What he didn't know was that he was merely an actor in a much larger, much darker play, and the man sitting silently before him held the script. The trap was not about to be set. The trap had been closing for years. Today, it would finally snap shut. Smash that like button, subscribe, and stay until the end to see how this shocking showdown unfolds. The gavel fell with a sharp crack, a sound that usually signaled the beginning of Adam Schiff's command performance. Chairman Jerry Nadler, a man whose loyalty Schiff had long taken for granted, peered over his spectacles and mumbled the hearing into session. The topic was a comfortable one for Schiff, the supposed scourge of misinformation, a subject that allowed him to pontificate on the virtues of established gatekeepers who, not coincidentally, amplified his every word. He felt the familiar surge of adrenaline, the intoxicating rush of knowing that millions were watching, ready to receive his gospel. He glanced at his aide, a young man whose entire career depended on Schiff's favor, and let a smirk play on his lips. A YouTuber he had scoffed earlier, the words a deliberate performance for the reporters nearby. Are we to debate policy with children who film themselves playing video games next? The condescension was a weapon, one he had honed to a razor's edge over countless cable news appearances and committee hearings. It was his brand. Today, he would wield it to perfection. He rose, interrupting Nadler before the chairman could even properly introduce the witness. This was his Rome, his show. Mr. Chairman, Schiff's voice boomed, each syllable polished by years of practice before our guest begins his presentation. I feel it is my duty to frame this discussion. He paused, letting the weight of his self-appointed authority settle over the room. He turned his gaze toward Shapiro, a predator sizing up his prey. We are here to discuss the pollution of our information ecosystem. And Mr. Shapiro, with all due respect, represents the very source of that pollution. He let the insult hang in the air. Shapiro's expression remained a placid mask, his eyes fixed on Schiff, betraying nothing. His hands rested calmly on a single, blood-red folder placed squarely in front of him. The folder was a prop, Schiff assumed, a pathetic attempt to mimic the gravitas of a real statesman. This is a man, Schiff continued, his voice dripping with theatrical disdain, who has built a career not on journalism but on outrage. Not on investigation but on provocation. He substitutes speed for accuracy and volume for substance. He is the face of a dangerous new wave of so-called citizen journalists who believe a Twitter account is a substitute for a press credential. Laughter, dutiful and practiced, rippled through the Democratic staffers seated behind him. They knew their role in this theater. Schiff was building to his crescendo, the moment he would dismiss Shapiro and, by extension, the entire new media landscape as illegitimate. So I must ask, Mr. Chairman, what qualifications does a podcaster possess to lecture the United States Congress on the complexities of truth? What's next? Will we be inviting Instagram models to testify on foreign relations? or perhaps TikTok stars to consult on fiscal policy, he felt a swell of satisfaction. The lines were landing. The narrative was his. He had painted Shapiro as a clown, a jester in the court of serious people. He was about to deliver the final, dismissive blow when a voice, calm and impossibly sharp, cut through the chamber. "Congressman," Shapiro said, his tone even and measured, devoid of the anger Schiff had expected. "Before we debate my qualifications, perhaps we could first discuss your long and profitable relationship with Mr. Ed Buck." The name was a grenade rolled silently across the polished floor. For a split second, there was only confusion. Then, recognition rippled through the gallery like a shockwave. Ed Buck. The name was poison. A Democratic megadonor, yes, but also a monster from a Hollywood nightmare, a predator whose West Hollywood apartment had become a tomb for vulnerable young men. A name that every Democrat in California, especially one from Burbank, had learned to fear. The tan seemed to melt from Adam Schiff's face. The cameras, unforgiving and relentless, captured the precise moment the blood drained from his cheeks. His mouth, which seconds before had been a fountain of confident rhetoric, hung open, a silent, gaping void. The master of the narrative had just lost the plot. The room, which had been buzzing with Schiff's orchestrated drama, fell into a stunning, absolute silence. In that silence, Ben Shapiro slowly, deliberately, reached for the red folder. His movements were precise, economical, the actions of a man who knew exactly what was coming next. He opened it, and the first page he turned was a photograph. It was angled just so, a calculated gesture for the C-SPAN cameras zoomed in tight. The image was unmistakable. Adam Schiff, smiling, shaking hands at a private gathering inside Ed Buck's now infamous apartment. The date stamp on the photo, clearly visible, was from after the first young man had been found dead on Buck's floor. The air in the room grew cold, heavy. Schiff's hand, which had been gesturing with such authority, flew to the table, gripping the edge as if to steady himself against a world suddenly tilting on its axis. His knuckles turned bone white. "Or," Shapiro continued, his voice never rising, never betraying a hint of triumph, "would you prefer we begin with your activities at the Standard Hotel, the Standard Hotel?" The words hung in the air, laced with a venom that was all the more potent for the calmness of their delivery. It was a second, more precise detonation, and its effect on Adam Schiff was galvanic. A tremor, visible even from the gallery, ran through his body. The name Ed Buck had been a body blow. This was a stiletto blade slipped between the ribs. "Mr. Chairman," he stammered, his voice a ragged, unfamiliar thing. He turned desperately to Nadler, his eyes pleading for the intervention of an ally, for the restoration of the old rules. This witness is abusing the forum. He is engaging in baseless, in conspiracy theories." The word conspiracy, once his most trusted weapon, now sounded like a pathetic shield. Shapiro's eyebrow arched, a minute gesture of theatrical skepticism. "Conspiracy, Congressman?" he asked, his voice a model of Socratic inquiry. "I'm merely asking about public records. Your documented meetings with a convicted predator. Your presence at a location now central to a federal investigation. Are facts now considered conspiracies in this chamber?" He didn't wait for an answer. He had the momentum, and he would not yield it. From the red folder, he slid a document, its edges crisp and official. "Let's start with the facts you'd rather ignore. January 2019. Just days after the body of Timothy Dean was discovered in Ed Buck's apartment, you attended an exclusive, high-dollar fundraiser at that very same residence. You were there, Congressman. We have the receipts, the photographs, the witness statements. While a community was grieving, while a family was mourning, you were clinking champagne glasses and collecting checks. So, before we discuss my dangerous narratives, would you care to explain to the American people what, precisely, was discussed at a crime scene that night?" The trap was no longer just sprung. Its steel jaws were grinding against bone. Adam Schiff, the Grand Inquisitor, the man who had built a career on televised accusations, was now the one in the dock. The hunter had become the hunted, and the predator's calm was terrifying. But perhaps, Shapiro said, smoothly transitioning as if sensing Schiff was on the verge of a complete meltdown, you're right. Let's stick to your professional qualifications. You were, after all, the chairman of the House Intelligence Committee. Your job was to discern truth from fiction, to protect the nation from falsehoods. So let's examine your record on that front. From his jacket pocket, Shapiro produced a small, sleek digital recorder. It looked innocuous, but in his hand, it became a weapon of mass destruction. You spent the better part of 4 years assuring the American public that you had seen, with your own eyes, direct evidence of collusion between the Trump campaign and the Russian government. Not circumstantial evidence, not suggestive evidence, direct evidence. Let's listen, shall we? Before Schiff or the stunned Nadler could formulate an objection, Shapiro pressed play. The voice that filled the silent room was instantly recognizable, but it sounded like a ghost from a different era. It was Adam Schiff's voice, dripping with the smug certainty that had been his trademark. The audio was a clip from a CNN interview, pristine in its quality. Jake, the recorded Schiff said to host Jake Tapper, I can tell you that the evidence is more than circumstantial, and I have seen direct evidence of collusion. Shapiro clicked the stop button. The silence that followed was deafening. That was March of 2017, Shapiro stated, his voice now taking on the cadence of a prosecutor laying out an airtight case. 2 years later, the Mueller report, the culmination of a multi-million-dollar investigation, stated, and I quote directly, the investigation did not establish that members of the Trump campaign conspired or coordinated with the Russian government. Your direct evidence somehow never materialized. He pressed play again. A new clip, a new network. Rachel, Schiff's voice echoed, this time from an MSNBC broadcast, I am absolutely certain. The evidence is damning and direct. Click. That was April 2017, Shapiro narrated. He played another. We have evidence that I can't share publicly yet, but it's more than enough for criminal charges. Click. CBS News, May 2017. Another. The evidence is clear. Click. ABC, June 2017. Click. Damning. Click. Overwhelming. Click. Undeniable. With each successive clip, each confident lie played back to its author, Adam Schiff seemed to physically shrink in his chair. The bravado, the tan, the perfectly coiffed hair, it all seemed to dissolve under the acid of his own recorded words. The committee room had transformed. It was no longer a hearing. It was a vivisection, and Schiff's credibility was being methodically stripped away, layer by layer, for the entire world to see. The Republican members of the committee, who had braced themselves for another round of partisan attacks, now leaned forward, their expressions a mixture of shock and vindicated fury. The Democrats, Schiff's own colleagues, suddenly found the contents of their phones to be utterly fascinating, their heads bowed, refusing to look at the man imploding beside them. Shapiro stopped the audio montage. I have, he said, his voice quiet but carrying to every corner of the room, 47 more recordings just like those. 47 separate instances where you, the chairman of the Intelligence Committee, went before the American people and claimed to have seen proof of treason that you knew did not exist. Shall I play them all, or perhaps, he paused, letting the threat hang in the air, we should move on to this. He selected a different audio file. The sound quality was different, grainier, more intimate, clearly recorded on a phone. The voice, however, was still unmistakably Schiff's, but this was not the public performer. This was the backroom strategist. Look, the recorded voice said, a weary frustration in its tone, we don't actually have the evidence yet, but the narrative is what matters. If we keep saying it, the investigation will find something. It has too. A second, unknown voice replied, hesitant. But Adam, isn't that lying to the public? There was a short, dismissive laugh from the recorded Schiff. It's not lying. It's shaping the battlefield. Trump's guilty of something. We just need to find what. A collective gasp swept through the gallery. This was not a misstatement. This was not hyperbole. This was a confession. This was the architect of the collusion narrative admitting, in his own words, that the entire edifice was built on a foundation of deliberate deception. The silence that followed was broken only by the frantic whispers of Schiff's lawyer, who had materialized at his side as if summoned from the ether. Schiff, his face a mask of disbelief and horror, shoved him away. The illusion of control was shattered. The king was naked, and his own words were the chorus mocking his humiliation. That recording, Shapiro explained, his voice cutting through the stunned silence with surgical precision, was provided by a member of your own staff. A patriot who grew deeply troubled by what they described as a deliberate and sustained campaign to mislead the American public, he placed the digital recorder back on the table, its purpose served. The confession hung in the air, irrevocable and damning. Schiff's lawyer, a man clearly unaccustomed to being in the spotlight, continued to whisper urgently, his words a frantic, unheard buzz against the backdrop of his client's public execution. Illegally obtained, Schiff finally managed to croak, the words clawing their way out of his throat. It was a desperate gambit, the last refuge of a man with no defense. Shapiro's response was swift and dismissive. Actually, Congressman, the District of Columbia is a one-party consent jurisdiction. Your staffer, being a party to the conversation, was perfectly within their legal rights to record it. Just as they were when they recorded every other meeting where you strategized how to sell a lie to the world. He gestured back toward the red folder, a silent promise of the vast arsenal that remained. But let's not get bogged down in your staff's admirable conscience. Let's talk about your own words, your own actions, your own lies. His voice, which had been scholarly and calm, now took on a harder edge, the voice of a man moving in for the kill. You told the American people you had seen direct evidence of treason. You knew that was false. You said it anyway. In the world of journalism, we call that a lie. In a courtroom, it's called perjury. In the world of intelligence you were supposed to lead, it's called a betrayal of the highest order. What do you call it, Congressman? Schiff's response was a barely audible mumble, a ghost of his former booming voice, political narrative building. The words were a pathetic attempt to cloak his deception in the jargon of his trade. Shapiro leaned forward, cupping a hand to his ear in a gesture of mock disbelief. I'm sorry, could you speak up? I believe the millions of Americans you deceived for 4 years deserve to hear your justification. Schiff's jaw tightened, a flicker of his old arrogance returning, but his voice cracked under the pressure. I said, I believed the evidence would eventually emerge. The admission was a catastrophe. Shapiro seized on it instantly. So you lied, he clarified, his voice sharp as broken glass, because you hoped evidence would appear later. Congressman, that is the logic of a witch hunt. That is a prosecutor declaring a man guilty and then desperately searching for a crime to fit his conviction. That is not how justice functions in the United States of America. Or at least, he added, his gaze sweeping across the chamber, it's not supposed to. The first chapter of Adam Schiff's public destruction was complete. His reputation as a truth-teller, the very foundation of his power, had been systematically demolished using his own words as the wrecking ball. But Shapiro had barely begun. The red folder, still thick with documents, lay waiting. Let's move on to something more recent, Shapiro announced, the transition seamless. He pulled a new sheaf of papers from the folder. The mood in the room shifted. This was not history. This was the raw, recent past, the Ukraine whistleblower. The catalyst for a presidential impeachment. You stood before the nation and swore you had no prior contact with the individual who filed the complaint. As he spoke, an image flashed onto the large screen behind the witness table. It was a transcript of a television interview, with a single sentence highlighted in bright yellow. Schiff's words, "We have not spoken directly with the whistleblower." Shapiro let the image linger. That was your statement on September 17, 2019, he noted, his tone forensic, a clear, unequivocal denial. Yet, we now know, through documents and testimony, that your own staff had a meeting with the whistleblower. Not on September 16th, not the week before. Your staff met with the whistleblower on July 26, 2019. He paused, allowing the timeline to sink in. That is not a minor discrepancy, Congressman. That is not a slip of the tongue. That is a nearly 2-month period of direct contact and coordination that you deliberately and repeatedly lied about. Schiff shifted in his chair, the fabric of his expensive suit seeming to rustle with his discomfort. My staff, he began, his voice strained, has routine contact with individuals. Routine, Shapiro interrupted, the word a sharp jab. He produced another document, holding it up for the cameras to see. This is a text message obtained under subpoena between your senior staffer, Patrick Boland, and the whistleblower. The date is August 12, 2019. The message reads, and I quote, Adam wants you to emphasize the quid pro quo angle. Make sure you mention the aid being withheld. We need this to sound as bad as possible. A wave of murmurs and gasps rolled through the gallery. Nadler banged his gavel, but the gesture was feeble. A man trying to command a tide that had already overwhelmed him. Even he looked shaken, his face pale. You didn't just have contact with the whistleblower, Congressman, Shapiro continued, his voice rising with controlled indignation. You coached the whistleblower, you directed the narrative. You helped write the very complaint that you would later present to the world as an independent, courageous act of truth-telling. That is not congressional oversight. That is a political black operation. It is an orchestrated hit job, and you were the director. He didn't stop. The documents came one after another, a relentless barrage of evidence. Here, he said, displaying an email on the screen, is a message from your chief of staff to the whistleblower's legal team. The whistleblower needs more concrete examples. Adam says to include the Zelensky call specifically, even if you weren't on it. He held up another. And another text, make sure you file through the ICIG first. Adam says that gives it more credibility. You weren't just shaping the story. You were mapping the entire strategy for its release. The evidence was overwhelming, a detailed blueprint of a conspiracy. But Shapiro had saved the most damning piece for last. And my personal favorite, he said, his voice dripping with irony, is this voicemail transcript left by your staffer for the whistleblower. Let me read it for you. He cleared his throat. Hey, it's Patrick from Schiff's office. The congressman wants to make sure you understand this needs to lead to impeachment. Shape your complaint accordingly, the chamber erupted. This was no longer an accusation, it was a smoking gun. The impeachment of a sitting president had been triggered not by an act of conscience but by a directive from a political opponent. The entire affair was being exposed as a fraud, a meticulously crafted illusion designed from the very beginning to achieve a political end. Adam Schiff, the man who had solemnly read the articles of impeachment on the House floor, was now revealed as the puppeteer who had been pulling the strings all along. But wait, Shapiro said, his voice cutting through the pandemonium with the practiced timing of a seasoned dramatist, there's more. The room quieted, the attendees leaning in, hungry for the next revelation. This is a recording from your own office, Congressman. The date is August 24, 2019, just before the whistleblower complaint became public. He pressed a button on his recorder. Again, Schiff's voice filled the room, but this was the sound of arrogance, of a man so confident in his power he felt no need for discretion. I don't care if the call transcript doesn't sound that bad, the recorded Schiff said dismissively. We'll read our own version into the record. I'll make it sound like a mafia shakedown. A staffer's voice, young and hesitant, could be heard in response. But, sir, shouldn't we wait to see the actual transcript? Schiff's reply was a snarl of impatience. By the time the real transcript comes out, our version will be the one everyone remembers. Narrative beats facts every time. Shapiro stopped the recording. The silence in the room was thick with astonishment. Narrative beats facts every time, Shapiro repeated, letting his predecessor's cynical mantra hang in the air like a toxic fog. And that is precisely what you did, he gestured to the large screen where a side-by-side comparison appeared. On one side was the official White House transcript of President Trump's call with Ukrainian President Zelensky. On the other was the florid, dramatic monologue Schiff had delivered on the floor of the House, a version filled with invented dialogue and sinister insinuations. "You didn't read the transcript," Shapiro accused, his voice a low, angry hum. "You performed a one-man show. You created quotes from whole cloth. You put words in the president's mouth that were never spoken. And when you were caught, when the actual transcript was released and your fabrications were exposed, you called it parody." He spat the word out as if it were poison. "But you didn't announce it as parody when you read it, did you, Congressman? You presented it to the world as the essence of the call. That is not parody. That is the deliberate fabrication of evidence by the chairman of the House Intelligence Committee." Schiff, cornered and desperate, tried to fight back. The essence of the call was the essence. Shapiro's voice sharpened into a blade. "Congressman, you attended Harvard Law School, did you not? A place where, I am told, they teach that evidence is what actually happened, not what a politician wishes had happened. You don't get to write fan fiction, present it as fact, and then call it oversight when you're exposed." He turned back to his folder, his movements crisp and deliberate. "But the most damning part of this entire sordid affair is that you knew. You knew the whistleblower's claims were weak from the start." This is from a transcript of a meeting in your office, August 28, 2019. An internal memo flashed on the screen. A staffer's concern was highlighted. "Adam, I've reviewed the complaint. It's mostly hearsay and assumptions based on second-hand information." Schiff's response, right below it, was chilling in its candor. "Doesn't matter. Once it's filed, we control the narrative. The media will run with it. By the time anyone fact-checks, we'll already be moving on impeachment." The staffer pushed back, "But if it falls apart?" Schiff's final, damning words, "It won't fall apart if we move fast enough." Speed beats accuracy in politics. Shapiro looked up from the document, his eyes locking onto Schiff's. "Speed beats accuracy," he repeated slowly. "That might be the most honest thing you've ever said, Congressman. You weaponized the impeachment process based on a complaint you helped write, from a whistleblower you coached, about a call you deliberately misrepresented. And you did it all at speed because you knew your case was a house of cards that couldn't withstand the slightest scrutiny." The Democratic side of the committee was now a sea of averted gazes and frantic texting. The political contagion was spreading, and no one wanted to be near ground zero. "One final document from this section," Shapiro said, his voice softening slightly as if in pity. "A text message from the whistleblower to your staffer sent after the complaint was filed and the firestorm had begun. It contains just 5 words. Did I do it right?" He paused. "Your staffer's response? Perfect. The congressman is very pleased. Your country owes you a great debt." Shapiro let the words settle. "A great debt," he mused, "for helping to orchestrate a fraudulent impeachment. I wonder if that's what the Founding Fathers had in mind." The second chapter of Schiff's demolition was complete. But as Shapiro reached into his red folder again, his expression grew more serious, the air of theatricality vanishing, replaced by a cold gravity. The documents he now handled were different, tagged not as opposition research, but with official evidence markers. The hearing was about to pivot from political malpractice to outright criminality. "Let's return to Ed Buck," Shapiro said, his voice dropping to a near whisper that commanded absolute attention. The Democratic mega-donor whose apartment became a house of horrors, photos of Gemmill Moore and Timothy Dean, the 2 young men who died there, appeared on the screen. Gemmill Moore died in July 2017. Timothy Dean died in January 2019, both from methamphetamine overdoses administered by Buck. He then displayed the photo from the beginning of the hearing, Schiff beaming, shaking hands with Buck at a fundraiser. This photo, Shapiro stated flatly, was taken 3 weeks after Gemmill Moore's death. You knew. The entire Democratic establishment in Los Angeles knew that a young man had died under suspicious circumstances in your donor's home. Yet you kept taking his money. another $150,000 after Moore died, another $200,000 after Dean died. At what point, Congressman, does that money become blood money? Schiff's lawyer was on his feet, objecting, but his words were drowned out by the chilling evidence appearing on the screen. It was an email chain between Schiff and his finance director. The director's email, dated August 2017, "Boss, the Buck situation is getting problematic. The Moore death is causing questions. Should we return the money?" Schiff's reply was brutally concise. "Keep it quiet. We need the funds for 2018. The casual dismissal of a man's death in exchange for campaign funds was shocking enough, but Shapiro was just laying the foundation. But Ed Buck wasn't just giving you his own money, was he, Congressman? This is where the story moves from moral bankruptcy to federal crime. Investigators have discovered that Buck was not just a predator. He was a conduit, a money launderer for foreign interests. He produced a new set of documents, bank records, wire transfers, all bearing the seal of a federal investigation. These records show a clear pattern: money flowing from Chinese businessmen associated with the Chinese Communist Party into Buck's network of nonprofits. That money was then donated to friendly politicians. Politicians like you. That's guilt by association. Schiff protested, his voice thin and reedy. "Is it?" Shapiro countered, immediately producing another piece of evidence. "Because this is a text message from you to Ed Buck, dated December 2018. It reads, 'Ed, the Chinese friends you introduced me to are very generous. Tell them we'll kill the Taiwan Arms Sale Committee.'" The gallery gasped as one. This was not association, this was conspiracy. This was the chairman of the Intelligence Committee promising to trade American foreign policy and the security of an ally in exchange for laundered cash from a hostile foreign power. "You took what you knew was Chinese money," Shapiro stated, his voice like steel, "laundered through a sexual predator who was killing young men in exchange for policy promises. That's not guilt by association, Congressman. That's guilt by participation." The accusation of treason, stark and undeniable, hung in the chamber. The text message remained on the screen, a digital death warrant for a political career. Adam Schiff stared at it, his face a canvas of gray, the words a reflection of a secret so dark he must have believed it would never see the light of day. He had built a fortress of lies around himself for years, and now its walls were being torn down, brick by damning brick. Ed Buck kept meticulous records, Shapiro continued, his voice relentless, the voice of a man reading from an indictment. It was his own insurance policy, we suspect, every dollar in, every dollar out. Your name, Congressman, appears 47 times in transactions that federal investigators have now traced directly back to Beijing. 47 separate payments for 47 separate betrayals. The sheer scale of the corruption was breathtaking. But Shapiro brought it back to the human cost, the moral horror at the heart of the conspiracy. The most unforgivable part is that you kept going back. You knew what he was, you knew what was happening in that apartment. But the money was too good to refuse. He gestured to the screen, and a new photograph appeared. It was grainy, clearly taken by a witness at a private event. It showed Schiff, glass in hand, at another fundraiser in Ed Buck's apartment. The date stamp was January 2019, the same week Timothy Dean died. In the background of the photo, partially obscured but horrifically recognizable, was the mattress on which Dean's body would be discovered just 3 days later. "You were fundraising at a crime scene," Shapiro said, his voice low and filled with contempt. "When activists in your own district, good Democrats, begged you to return the money, to distance yourself from this monster, what did you do?" A screenshot of a tweet from Schiff's official account appeared. "I don't allow unfounded accusations to influence my judgment," it read. "Ed Buck has been a champion for Democratic causes." Shapiro read the words aloud. "A champion for Democratic causes. 2 young men were dead, Congressman. And you called their killer a champion because he wrote you checks. Checks, as we now know, filled with Chinese money. The room was utterly still, caught in the grip of a story that grew more depraved with each revelation. But there's more, Shapiro said, his voice dropping, signaling another descent into darkness. The FBI found something else in Buck's apartment during their raid, something he kept for leverage. Would you like to tell the committee what that was? Or should I? Schiff had gone from pale to translucent. His hands trembled so violently that when he reached for his water glass, he nearly knocked it over. Videos, Shapiro said simply. The word landed with the force of a physical blow. Buck didn't just record his victims, he recorded his business meetings. Including his meetings with you, Congressman. The implication was a coiled snake in the center of the room. What had been discussed? What had been seen? What had been done in those recorded meetings that Schiff so desperately needed to remain hidden? Would you like to explain what's on those tapes? Shapiro asked, the question a clear threat. Or should we all wait for the FBI to play them as evidence in Buck's ongoing criminal trial? The silence was Schiff's answer. $753,000, Shapiro concluded, summarizing the charge. That's the total amount of Chinese money that flowed directly to you through the accounts of a man who was drugging and killing people in his home. 2 men died while you were cashing his checks. Tell me, Congressman, was it worth it? Before the weight of that question could even be processed, Shapiro seamlessly pivoted to the next chapter of corruption. Since we're on the topic of foreign money, he said, opening a new section of the red folder, let's talk about Ukraine. The name itself was a trigger, the country at the heart of the impeachment Schiff had championed. You led the charge against President Trump for allegedly pressuring Ukraine. But what, Congressman, were your own Ukrainian connections? He produced a new set of documents. Igor Pasternak, he said, as a photo of a smiling, bearded man appeared on the screen, his arm draped chummily around Schiff's shoulders, a Ukrainian-American arms dealer. And coincidentally, one of your most generous donors. A rapid succession of photos flashed across the screen, Schiff at Pasternak's opulent home. Schiff on Pasternak's yacht, the blue waters of the Mediterranean sparkling behind them. Schiff as the guest of honor at lavish Ukrainian independence celebrations hosted by Pasternak. Between 2013 and 2019, Shapiro detailed Mr. Pasternak and his associates organized fundraisers that funneled a staggering $2.3 million into your campaign coffers. He then put up a timeline, simple and devastating. And the timing of these donations is interesting, he observed with dry understatement. 2014, a $500,000 fundraising haul, followed immediately by your vote to approve a major military aid package to Ukraine. 2017, a $700,000 haul, followed by your successful push to approve the sale of lethal Javelin missiles. 2019, a $1 million haul, just before you launched the impeachment inquiry into President Trump over Ukraine. Igor Pasternak is a legitimate businessman, Schiff interjected, his voice raspy. A legitimate businessman, Shapiro repeated, who sells weapons to the Ukrainian military and who profits directly every time the United States Congress approves another military aid package. Aid that you championed using money he gave you. That's not legitimate business, Congressman. That's called purchasing policy, the evidence escalated. But Mr. Pasternak wasn't operating alone, Shapiro continued, displaying a complex web of wire transfers on the screen. These records, part of a separate federal probe, show money flowing from Ukrainian oligarchs through Pasternak's network and into your campaign accounts. Including, he paused for dramatic effect, funds directly traceable to executives at a company called Burisma Holdings. The name electrified the room, Burisma. The corrupt energy company that had hired Hunter Biden, the company at the very center of the Trump-Ukraine impeachment saga. $750,000, Shapiro stated, from Burisma-connected oligarchs laundered through various channels ended up in your war chest. You were taking money from the very company at the heart of the scandal you claimed to be investigating. That's not oversight, Congressman. That's a cover-up. You weren't investigating corruption. You were protecting your own income stream. These are lies, conspiracy theories. Schiff yelled, his composure finally cracking completely. Are they? Shapiro asked calmly and produced another internal staff memo. It was dated September 2019. Boss, it read, the Pasternak connection might be problematic if anyone digs into our Ukraine funding. Should we distance ourselves? Schiff's typed response was displayed for all to see. Double down. Accuse Trump of what we're doing. Classic projection. Works every time. The admission was breathtaking. It was a written confession to a deliberate, cynical strategy to accuse the president of the very corruption that he himself was engaged in. The entire impeachment was not just a fraud. It was a projection, a desperate attempt to create a smokescreen to hide his own dirty deals. The chamber was left speechless by the sheer audacity of the plot. The memo remained on the screen, a monument to cynical political strategy. Accuse Trump of what we're doing, Shapiro repeated, letting the words sink into the horrified silence of the room. You didn't just stumble into hypocrisy, Congressman, you planned it. You weaponized it. The members of the committee, once his peers, now looked at him as if he were a venomous creature they had just discovered in their midst. His allies were gone, vanished into a sea of downcast eyes and sudden fascinations with their own shoelaces. He was utterly alone, adrift on an ocean of his own documented deceit. But here's the most interesting part, Shapiro continued, his voice steady and relentless. This is an intercepted communication from Ukrainian intelligence. Yes, Congressman, they spy on us too. It's a conversation between two Burisma executives discussing your frequent visits to Kiev. He read from the translated transcript, his voice devoid of emotion. Executive 1, Schiff is completely on board. He understands the stakes. Executive 2, he'll protect our interests in Congress. The payments through Pasternak are working perfectly. Shapiro looked up from the page, his eyes locking onto Schiff's. They called you an asset, Congressman, a Ukrainian energy company steeped in corruption, considered the chairman of the U.S. House Intelligence Committee their paid asset in Washington. You accused a sitting president of a quid pro quo with Ukraine, while you yourself were the quid pro quo. Every military aid package you pushed, every resolution you sponsored, every investigation you blocked, it all coincided with deposits into your campaign accounts from your Ukrainian friends. He gestured to the screen where a new graphic appeared. It was a timeline, stark and irrefutable, showing the direct correlation between the flow of Ukrainian money and Schiff's official actions in Congress. The pattern was undeniable, a perfect dance of bribery and policy. $3.7 million, Shapiro calculated, the final sum landing like a hammer blow. That's the total from Ukrainian sources. That's what it cost to buy the chairman of the Intelligence Committee. And while you were negotiating your fees, young Ukrainian soldiers were fighting and dying on the front lines. Sometimes with outdated equipment because the aid you controlled was being used as leverage for your own enrichment. He paused, letting the weight of the accusation settle. The irony, he added, his voice laced with contempt, is that you impeached a president for a phone call about corruption in Ukraine while you were the corruption in Ukraine. That's not just hypocrisy, Congressman. That's a form of performance art. Shapiro carefully placed the Ukraine documents to one side and opened a new section of the folder. This one was thicker than the others, filled with documents heavily marked with black redaction lines. Let's discuss your handling of classified information, he said, the shift in topic bringing a new kind of chill to the room. As chairman of the Intelligence Committee, you were entrusted with our nation's most sensitive secrets. You took an oath to protect them. Let's examine how you fulfilled that solemn responsibility. A complex chart appeared on the screen behind him. It showed two distinct data streams plotted over a 4-year period. One line represented the dates and times of classified intelligence briefings Schiff had attended in a sensitive compartmented information facility, or SCIF. The other line tracked the publication times of major national security stories by a handful of specific journalists at CNN, the New York Times, and the Washington Post. The two lines moved in perfect, terrifying synchrony. Every time you left a SCIF, Shapiro explained, within hours and sometimes within minutes, the highly classified details of that briefing would appear in the media, attributed to sources familiar with the intelligence. The correlation is statistically perfect. That's circumstantial. Schiff shot back, his voice a desperate rasp. Is it? Shapiro countered, immediately producing phone records. These are your call logs, Congressman, obtained under a FISA warrant by federal investigators. They show your calls to those very same reporters, placed immediately after you exited classified briefings. He began to list them, a relentless drumbeat of betrayal. March 3, 2020, you attend a briefing on Iranian covert military movements. 1 hour later, your phone records show a 12-minute call to a CNN reporter. The next morning, CNN breaks a story on those exact Iranian movements, citing details only someone in that briefing could know. He continued, his voice cold and methodical. April 17th, a briefing on Chinese cyber operations against U.S. infrastructure. 2 hours later, a call to a reporter at the Washington Post. The following day, the Post runs an exclusive on those specific cyber operations. May 22nd, a briefing on a Russian assassination program in Europe. 90 minutes later, a call to an MSNBC producer. The next evening, MSNBC leads its broadcast with an exclusive on that very assassination program. He looked up from the records. Shall I continue, Congressman? I have 73 more documented examples. 73 instances where you took the nation's most vital secrets and traded them for a headline. You used classified intelligence as your personal currency to buy media adoration and build your political brand. The accusation was staggering. This was not just leaking, this was a systematic weaponization of state secrets for personal gain. But you didn't just leak for positive press, Shapiro continued, his voice dropping, becoming darker. You leaked to distract from your own scandals. A text exchange between Schiff and a prominent CNN producer flashed on the screen. Schiff's message, I need you to run the Russia story hard tonight. I'm facing pressure from the left over the buck situation. This will change the narrative. Shapiro let the words hang in the air. You leaked classified intelligence about a foreign adversary to provide political cover for your own corrupt relationship with a sexual predator. You deliberately endangered national security for personal damage control. That's not just unethical, Congressman. That is a criminal act. He paused, and his expression, already grim, darkened further. He produced one final document from the section. It was a counterintelligence assessment, its top secret marking clearly visible. 3 American assets operating undercover in hostile territory were compromised and killed after you leaked operational details of their program to the media, Shapiro said, his voice barely a whisper. Their deaths, according to this intelligence assessment, are directly traceable to the specifics of your leaks. On the screen, 3 anonymous stars from the CIS memorial wall appeared. These officers died because you wanted a headline, Shapiro said quietly, the accusation now heavy with the weight of real lives lost. Their families will never know their real names. They will never know the details of their sacrifice. But they know that someone in the United States Congress got them killed for political gain. And now, so do we. The revelation of the dead assets cast a pall of death over the hearing room. The political gamesmanship, the lies, the hypocrisy, all of it suddenly seemed trivial in the face of such a profound betrayal. The air was thick with a shared sense of horror. Adam Schiff, who had postured as a guardian of national security, was being exposed as a man whose vanity and ambition had led to the deaths of American heroes. He sat motionless, a man hollowed out, the enormity of the accusations seemingly too vast for him to even process. The silence was broken by the rustle of paper as Shapiro, his own face a mask of grim duty, opened the next folder. This one was marked with a simple, ominous word, sensitive. This next section, Shapiro began, his voice low and somber, involves ongoing federal investigations into some of the most serious crimes imaginable. I will be careful to discuss only what is already part of the public record or contained within official investigative documents. He turned his gaze to Schiff, a look that was no longer just accusatory but filled with a deep, personal revulsion. Your congressional district, California's 30th, includes the heart of Hollywood. Your donor list has long been a who's who of entertainment industry figures, and a disturbing number of those figures have since been arrested for, or credibly accused of, heinous crimes involving minors. A series of photographs appeared on the screen, each one a snapshot from a lavish fundraiser, each one tying Schiff to a known predator. This is you at the home of film director Bryan Singer in 2015, Shapiro narrated. Mr. Singer has since fled the country, facing a torrent of allegations of assaulting underage boys. You accepted over $100,000 in donations from him after the first credible allegations had already surfaced. Another photo flashed. This is you at a fundraiser hosted by television producer John Grisham, who is now serving a 20-year federal prison sentence for child trafficking. He donated $75,000 to your campaigns. Another photo. This is you on the yacht of theme park designer Gary Goddard in 2017. Mr. Goddard was publicly accused by 8 different former child actors of sexual assault. You took $50,000 from him after those accusations were made public. The pattern was sickening, a tour through the darkest corners of Hollywood's underbelly, with Adam Schiff present at every stop, his hand out, his smile fixed. Taking money from criminals is one thing, Congressman, Shapiro continued, his voice tight with disgust. But investigators have noted a more troubling pattern. Every one of these powerful men was, at some point, the subject of a federal investigation. And in every single case, those investigations were mysteriously slowed, complicated, or completely derailed by leaks. Leaks about sensitive investigative methods, leaks that compromised confidential informants, leaks that gave the targets time to destroy evidence or flee the country. He put up a timeline on the screen that was as damning as the one tracking his media leaks. The federal investigation into Bryan Singer begins, Shapiro narrated. Shortly thereafter, you are briefed, as Intelligence Committee Chairman, on new surveillance methods being used to track suspects overseas. Within days, an article appears in The Hollywood Reporter detailing those exact methods. 2 weeks later, Singer flees the United States, and he has not returned. Another timeline appeared. The investigation into John Grisham's trafficking ring begins. You are briefed on the witness protection program being used to safeguard his young victims. Soon after, an anonymous tip, containing details only someone from that briefing would know, is leaked to a gossip website. 2 of the key witnesses recant their testimony, terrified for their lives. The question that followed was a cannon shot, fired at point-blank range. Were you protecting pedophiles who donated to your campaigns, Congressman? Shapiro asked, his voice ringing with righteous fury. Or is it just a tragic coincidence that every Hollywood predator who wrote you a check seemed to get a timely, anonymous warning that allowed them to escape justice? The most damning evidence came next. It was a redacted document, an excerpt from an FBI interview with a victim in the Grisham trafficking case. This victim, Shapiro explained, his voice softening with empathy, describes being forced to attend a party at one of your donors' mansions. A party where minors were present and drugs were being openly distributed. The victim specifically remembers you being there, Congressman. They remember seeing their congressman at a party where children were being drugged and abused. He paused, letting the horror of the image sink in. Would you like to explain what you were doing at parties where children were being victimized? Schiff was sweating profusely now, dabbing at his forehead with a trembling hand. His attorney was writing frantically on a legal pad, but there were no words that could and do this. I never witnessed any wrongdoing, Schiff stammered, the denial weak and reflexive. Never witnessed it. Shapiro shot back. He signaled for the next image. It was a photograph clearly taken on a cell phone at a crowded party. The image was partially pixelated to protect identities, but in the background, unmistakably, was Adam Schiff. He was holding a drink, smiling, while in the foreground, figures who looked alarmingly young were being handed what appeared to be alcoholic drinks by older men. The FBI would very much like to know what you saw that night, Congressman, Shapiro said, his voice cold as ice. So would the parents of those children. So would the American people, who have a right to expect that their elected officials do not attend and thereby legitimize parties where minors are being preyed upon. He carefully closed the section, his movements deliberate. The federal investigations are ongoing, he stated, his words carrying the weight of a judge's sentence. But prosecutors have noted that you are a person of interest in multiple cases involving crimes against children. Not as a perpetrator, they stress, he added, a small but significant clarification, but as a man who may have had knowledge of these crimes, a man who was in a position to intervene, and who chose time and time again to look the other way, take the check, and protect the powerful. He leaned forward, his eyes boring into Schiff's. How many fundraisers, Congressman, how many parties where you knew something was deeply wrong, but the money was too important? How many children might have been saved if you had spoken up instead of cashing in? The question was unanswerable. The silence in the room was no longer just about political shock. It was a silence of profound moral disgust. The hearing had descended into the darkest territory imaginable, and it was clear that the bottom had not yet been reached. The hearing room was dead silent, suffocating under the weight of the last accusation. Even the most hardened political journalists in the gallery looked shaken. The story of Adam Schiff had spiraled from political lies to criminal conspiracy and now to a place of unimaginable moral rot. Shapiro took a deep breath, his hands, which had been steady throughout the hours-long ordeal, showing the slightest tremor as he opened the next folder. This was it, the abyss, Mr. Chairman, Shapiro said, his voice now a somber, formal address to Nadler. What I am about to discuss involves an active and ongoing federal murder investigation. I have been authorized by the Department of Justice to share certain specific details that are already known to law enforcement but have not yet been made public. I want to be exceptionally careful here. He turned his gaze back to Adam Schiff, whose face had gone from ashen to a waxy, death-like pallor. The man looked like a statue of his former self, frozen in a state of pure terror. January 23, 2018, Shapiro began, the date dropping into the silence like a stone into a deep well. The Standard Hotel in West Hollywood, you hosted a private, high-dollar fundraiser in the penthouse suite. Can you tell the committee what happened that night, Congressman? Schiff's attorney, seeing the direction this was heading, leapt to his feet. Mr. Chairman. Objection. This is beyond the pale. These are disgusting, baseless conspiracy theories from the darkest corners of the Internet. Shapiro didn't even flinch. He calmly produced an official-looking document. Conspiracy theories, he asked, his voice cold and flat. This is a Los Angeles Police Department incident report. Time, 11:47 p.m., January 23, 2018. A body was discovered at the Standard Hotel. He paused, letting the words hang in the air. The victim was a young freelance journalist named Jonathan Kessler. He was investigating corruption in Hollywood and its links to powerful political figures. The name might not have been widely known, but the implication was clear. The initial coroner's report ruled his death an accidental overdose, Shapiro continued. But Mr. Kessler had no history of drug use. His family and his editor insisted he would never touch the stuff. The FBI, to their credit, agreed that the circumstances were suspicious. They have since reopened the case as a potential homicide. He gestured to the screen where partially redacted crime scene photos appeared. They were clinical, sterile, and horrifying. Mr. Kessler was at the hotel that night for one reason. He was investigating your fundraiser. His notes, recovered from his laptop's hard drive, mention your event specifically. This, Shapiro said, holding up a printout, is the final text message he ever sent. It was to his editor. It reads, "At the Schiff fundraiser. You won't believe what I'm seeing. This is huge. We'll call in an hour." Shapiro looked up. He never called. He was found dead less than an hour later in a room 2 floors directly below your party. The narrative was tightening like a noose. But here's where it gets interesting, Shapiro said, his voice dropping to a near whisper. Hotel security footage seized by the FBI shows something highly unusual. At 11:15 p.m., 2 men dressed in hotel maintenance uniforms, men who, it turns out, did not work for the hotel, are seen using a key card to enter Mr. Kessler's room. They leave 10 minutes later. And then, at 11:33 p.m., he paused, his eyes boring into Schiff. You, Congressman Schiff, are seen on security footage in the hallway on that same floor, just feet from Kessler's room. What were you doing there? Schiff's mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. He looked like a fish gasping for air. The bathroom, he finally croaked. The bathroom on our floor was occupied. Shapiro's expression was one of utter disbelief. All 7 bathrooms in the penthouse suite were occupied, Congressman. That must have been quite a party. He didn't let Schiff answer. Who else was at that party, Congressman? According to witness statements compiled by the FBI, your guest list included Ed Buck. It included several of the Hollywood figures now under investigation for crimes against children. And most interestingly, it included 3 individuals who entered the country on diplomatic passports from the People's Republic of China. The pieces of the puzzle were now being laid out, and the picture they were forming was one of unimaginable darkness. The FBI's working theory, Shapiro continued, his voice careful and precise, is that Jonathan Kessler witnessed something at your fundraiser he was not supposed to see. A transaction, an exchange, something that connected the dots between the Hollywood money, the Chinese intelligence agents, and you. They believe he was killed to prevent him from reporting it. And they would very much like to know what you know about his death. I had nothing to do with it, Schiff cried out, the denial sounding hollow and panicked. Then why? Shapiro shot back, the questions coming like bullets. Did you call the hotel manager 17 times in the 48 hours following Kessler's death? Why did your chief of staff authorize a $50,000 wire transfer to the hotel's parent company the following week, listed as a consulting fee? And why did 3 of your most trusted staff members, all of whom were at that party, suddenly quit their jobs and leave the country within a month of that night? Phone records and bank transfers flashed on the screen, a damning mosaic of circumstantial evidence. One of those staff members, Shapiro revealed, dropping another bombshell, has since been located by federal authorities. They are now cooperating with the investigation. They describe a culture of pure panic in your office after that night. They say you were a man possessed, making frantic calls, talking about needing to fix something. What needed fixing, Congressman? The final piece of evidence was the most chilling of all. Kessler's laptop was found wiped clean, Shapiro said. But the FBI's cyber forensics unit is the best in the world. They managed to recover one fragmented file. It's a partial audio recording from inside your fundraiser, apparently recorded by Kessler just before he was discovered. Schiff's lawyer was shouting now. Absolutely not. That's sealed evidence in an ongoing murder investigation. Actually, Shapiro corrected calmly, the DOJ has authorized the release of this specific portion in the hopes of identifying additional witnesses. He pressed play. The audio was muffled, distorted by background noise, but certain words, certain voices were terrifyingly clear. Schiff's voice, ... need to be more careful. Can't have random people wandering around. An unknown voice with a thick accent, the shipment from Beijing is secure. Schiff's voice, Buck's guys will handle it. Just keep the media away. Another unknown voice, what about the girl from the sound of a door slamming? Schiff's voice, suddenly sharp and angry. Who the hell is that? Is someone recording? The audio cut off abruptly. The silence that followed was absolute. The FBI believes, Shapiro said slowly, his voice heavy with the gravity of the accusation, that Jonathan Kessler was discovered at that moment, recording your meeting. They believe someone at that fundraiser followed him and made sure he never filed his story. They are building a case for murder, Congressman, and you are not a witness. You are a suspect, the word suspect echoed in the cavernous hearing room, a final, definitive branding. Adam Schiff was no longer just a liar or a corrupt politician. He was now publicly named as a suspect in a murder investigation. The room erupted. Reporters were shouting, their professional decorum shattered. Committee members were on their feet, some demanding order, others staring at Schiff in pure, unadulterated horror. Through the chaos, Adam Schiff sat frozen, a man crushed under the impossible weight of the accusation. 3 more whistleblowers have come forward about that night. Shapiro yelled over the din, his voice cutting through the noise. They are all in federal protective custody. And they all tell the same story. Something monstrous happened at the Standard Hotel, and you, Congressman, have been covering it up ever since. As Chairman Nadler frantically banged his gavel, slowly restoring a semblance of order, Shapiro opened his final folder. This one was marked with 2 words, Congressional Security Breach. The energy in the room shifted again, from the lurid horror of a murder plot to the cold, hard currency of Washington power. Let's discuss how you've maintained your position through all of this, Shapiro began, his voice returning to a steely calm. How does a man so thoroughly compromised, so deeply corrupt, not only survive but rise to become one of the most powerful figures in the country? The answer is as simple as it is ugly: blackmail. He gestured to the screen where a series of documents appeared. They were file directories, screenshots from a computer hard drive. These are from your office computers, Shapiro explained, seized under a federal warrant last month. It seems you weren't just using your position on the Intelligence Committee to leak secrets to the press. You were using it to spy on your colleagues, to gather dirt, and to build a private arsenal of compromat. The file names were shocking in their specificity: Graham_Lindsay_compromat_China_connections.docx. Pelosi_Nancy_financial_crimes_insider_trading.pdf. Swalwell_Eric_full_intel_report.zip. McConnell_Mitch created dossiers on everyone. Shapiro stated family_business. Democrats, Republicans, it made no difference. You tasked your staff with using the vast resources of the U.S. intelligence community, the NSA, the CIA, the FBI, to spy on your own colleagues. Then you used what you found to control them, to ensure their silence, to demand their loyalty. That's an absurd fabrication. Schiff spat, finding his voice at last. Is it? Shapiro countered, immediately displaying a printed email. This is an email from you to a senior staffer. Pull all NSA intercepts on Senator Graham's recent phone calls. I need leverage for the upcoming judicial vote. This, he showed another, is a request you filed with ACIA liaison. I need the full file on Mitch McConnell's wife's family business dealings in China, and this is you asking an FBI contact for the surveillance reports on your own Democratic colleagues who were thinking of challenging you for the chairmanship. The evidence was a stunning indictment of abuse of power. But you didn't just collect the information, Shapiro continued, the pace quickening. You used it. A text message from Schiff to House Speaker Nancy Pelosi appeared on the screen. Nancy, I think we should reconsider the Taiwan bill. Would be a shame for news of your husband's latest tech stock trades to become public before the earnings call. Shapiro looked up. That's blackmail. Another text, this one to Republican leader Kevin McCarthy. Kevin, I need you to support my amendment. Otherwise, that unfortunate situation in Bakersfield might just become tomorrow's headline. Shapiro's voice was like ice. That's extortion. You turned the House Intelligence Committee into your own personal blackmail operation, Shapiro declared, his voice ringing through the chamber. That's why no one dared to stop you. That's why your endless lies about Russia went unchallenged by your own party. They weren't your allies. They were your hostages. He produced one last, particularly vicious recording transcript from Schiff's office. Schiff's voice. Pull everything on him. Family, finances, known affairs, rumored affairs, I don't care. Everyone has a secret. Find his and remind him why he shouldn't cross me. Shapiro looked up, his face grim. That freshman congressman you were targeting, the one who had dared to question your methods, attempted to take his own life 3 months later after details of his affair were leaked to a political blog. You drove a man to the brink of death just to protect your own power. That's not politics, Congressman. That's evil. The web of corruption seemed endless, but Shapiro was now moving toward the endgame. He pulled out a final document, this one bearing the official seal of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. Congressman Schiff, he said, his voice taking on a formal, almost ceremonial tone. Are you aware that you have been the primary target of a multi-agency federal investigation for the past 2 years? Schiff's head, which had been bowed in defeat, snapped up. His eyes were wide with shock. What? It's called Operation Clean Sweep, Shapiro explained. A joint task force of the FBI, the Department of Justice, and the intelligence community's own internal affairs units, created to investigate corruption at the highest levels of Congress. You, Congressman, were target number 1. He glanced at his watch, a deliberate, theatrical gesture. In fact, he said, they should be executing multiple search warrants at your various offices right about now. As if on cue, a side door burst open. A frantic committee aide rushed to Chairman Nadler, whispering urgently in his ear. Nadler's face, already pale, turned the color of chalk. He stared at Shapiro, his mouth agape. Mr. Shapiro, Nadler said, his voice trembling. I've just been informed that FBI agents are, in fact, at Congressman Schiff's Capitol Hill office, as well as his home in Maryland, his district office in Burbank. And, oh my God, what is it? Schiff demanded, his voice a panicked shriek. Nadler looked at him, his expression a mixture of terror and pity. They're also at your wife's office, he stammered, your campaign headquarters. And they've frozen all your financial accounts pending a full federal investigation. The room was in an uproar. This was no longer a hearing, it was the real-time collapse of a king. The grand jury has been meeting in secret for 6 months, Congressman, Shapiro announced over the noise. They have heard testimony from 47 witnesses. Your former staffers who turned state's evidence. Your donor, Ed Buck, who is cooperating fully from federal prison. Even some of your Chinese friends who were intercepted and flipped by our counterintelligence agents. He held up a thick document. This is a partial list of the charges being considered by the grand jury. It's 4 pages long, but the highlights include conspiracy to commit espionage, wire fraud, dozens of campaign finance violations, obstruction of justice, lying to federal investigators, and, pending the final outcome of the standard hotel investigation, accessory to murder. Schiff tried to stand, to protest, but his legs seemed to have lost their strength. The mighty chairman, the man who had terrorized Washington for years, was finally irrevocably broken. His closest allies, the very people he had blackmailed into submission, now began to see their chance. Representative Eric Swalwell, himself notoriously compromised by a Chinese spy, was the first to turn. He stood up, glancing nervously at the cameras. Mr. Chairman, he declared, I think in light of these shocking and deeply disturbing allegations, Congressman Schiff should recuse himself from these proceedings immediately. Recuse myself, Schiff sputtered, turning to him with a look of betrayal. Eric, you know what I have on. I know nothing. Swalwell interrupted, his voice high with panic. And I resent the implication. I am appalled by what I have heard today. He was not just distancing himself, he was running for his life. The dam had broken, the betrayal was immediate and total. Representative Maxine Waters, a stalwart of the Progressive Caucus, rose to her feet, her face a mask of theatrical indignation. "I'm shocked and appalled by these revelations," she declared, her voice booming for the cameras. "I had no idea Adam was involved in such nefarious activities. He has betrayed our trust, and he should resign from Congress immediately." Schiff, desperate, turned to her, his voice a pathetic plea. "Maxine, you were at the Buck fundraisers. You knew about the money. I knew nothing of the sort." Waters insisted, gathering her papers with a flourish of disgust. "And I will be recommending the Ethics Committee launch a full investigation. Excuse me, I have urgent business elsewhere." She swept out of the room, leaving a void wherein a lie had once stood. One by one, the rats fled the sinking ship. Democrats who had stood by him for years, who had amplified his lies and benefited from his power, now scrambled over each other to denounce him. Each departure was another nail in his political coffin. His power, built on the fear he instilled, had vanished in an instant. Without the threat of blackmail, he was nothing to them but a liability, a stain to be scrubbed away. Finally, he turned his pleading eyes to the last man who could save him, Chairman Jerry Nadler. "Jerry, please," Schiff begged, his voice cracking. "You know what I know about your son's business dealings, .. Double quotes. Nadler's face hardened. The fear was gone, replaced by cold, political calculation. He lifted his gavel. "Congressman Schiff," he announced, his voice suddenly firm and authoritative, "you are out of order. In fact, you are hereby relieved of all your committee assignments pending the outcome of the federal investigation. Security," he commanded, "please escort Mr. Schiff from the chamber." As two uniformed Capitol Police officers approached his chair, Schiff made one last, desperate gambit. He struggled to his feet, pointing a trembling finger at the fleeing Democrats. "If I go down, I'm taking everyone with me. Pelosi, Schumer, all of them, they all knew. They all participated. Please do," Shapiro said calmly from the witness table, his voice cutting through the chaos. "The FB, I would love to hear everything you have to say. In fact, I believe they have a comfortable room all prepared for your debriefing. It's called a plea negotiation." The fight went out of him. As the officers took his arms, he was no longer a powerful chairman, but a frail, defeated old man. He turned back one last time, his eyes wild. "This isn't over. I'll beat this. Facts," Shapiro repeated, his voice a final, quiet epitaph. "Don't care about your feelings. And the facts are, you're a traitor, a liar, and now a federal defendant. Goodbye, Congressman." The heavy doors of the committee room closed behind him, the sound a definitive thud that marked the end of an era. Within hours, the political earthquake that began in that hearing room had reshaped the landscape of Washington. The hashtag Schiff for prison exploded globally, reaching 1 billion impressions by midnight. Clips of Shapiro's methodical demolition job became the most viewed videos on the internet, a brutal, mesmerizing spectacle of justice delivered live. The media institutions that had built Schiff up scrambled to tear him down. On CNN, a grave-faced Anderson Cooper issued a stunning mea culpa. "We are shocked and appalled. We trusted Congressman Schiff as a reliable source. We were clearly and repeatedly deceived. We apologize to our viewers for our role in inadvertently spreading the misinformation he crafted." On MSNBC, Rachel Maddow, who had made Schiff a cornerstone of her program for years, delivered a tearful on-air monologue. "I believed him," she said, her voice choked with emotion. "I defended him. I promoted his narratives. I was wrong. I failed you, my audience, and I am deeply, profoundly sorry." The Democratic Party, seeing a threat to its very existence, went into full damage control. Speaker Pelosi, whom Schiff had threatened to expose, held an emergency press conference. "The Democratic caucus is united in our shock," she stated, her voice brittle. "Adam Schiff betrayed the trust of his country. He will face the full force of the law, and he will receive no protection from this party." Behind the scenes, a silent panic gripped Capitol Hill. The files Shapiro had revealed were real. Who else would be exposed? Dozens of congressmen and senators made frantic calls to criminal defense attorneys. The age of blackmail was over, and the age of accountability had begun with a vengeance. Schiff's arrest that evening was almost an anticlimax. He surrendered quietly at his Maryland home, his famous eloquence finally silenced. The booking photo, released moments later, showed a broken man, his eyes hollow, his face a ruin. The grand jury indictments were unsealed the next day, 147 pages detailing a career of breathtaking criminality. Legal experts predicted a sentence that would ensure he would die in prison. That evening, Ben Shapiro sat in his Daily Wire studio. He was no longer the calm, precise inquisitor. He was a citizen addressing his nation. Today was not a victory for Republicans, he began, his voice resonating with conviction. It was a victory for truth. Adam Schiff was not an anomaly. He was a symptom of a deep sickness in our government. A sickness of lies, foreign influence, and corruption. The question now is whether we have the courage to finish the job, to clean the house regardless of party, to demand integrity from all who hold power. He looked directly into the camera, his gaze unflinching. To those still in power who believe it's business as usual, know this: we are watching. We have the receipts, and we are no longer afraid to use them. Adam Schiff thought he was untouchable. He was wrong. In America, eventually, truth wins. As his words echoed across the nation, a sense of hope, long dormant, began to stir. In his federal holding cell, Adam Schiff watched his former allies, his media champions, his political party, all condemn him on the small television. He had built an empire of lies, and in a single afternoon, one man with a red folder of facts had burned it to the ground. As the lights in his cell went out, he was left alone in the dark with the great, crushing irony of his life. He had impeached a president for crimes he himself was committing on a scale unimaginable. And in the end, it wasn't politics that destroyed him, it was the truth. It was a lesson that would reshape American politics for a generation. The age of accountability had finally, truly begun. Thank you for watching. If you believe truth must always win, smash that like button, subscribe to this channel for more deep dives, and share this video to spread the word. The real work starts now.